I know that the conversation is vibrant. I understand that the energy is electric. I can see that the connections that are taking place across time and space as a result of mental energy are connecting people to talk about things of great importance to them. And we have more. It's like that shill on the late night TV. Wait, there's more, right? This is the more part. So if I can get you all to join us, or at least let the hubbub subside a tad, we want to continue with incredible opportunities to take the first stage of this opportunity and advance it. Because we've already spent a good bit of time telling the law schools what they can do and what they should do. Now we need to listen to the legal practitioners so they can tell us what they are doing, and we can tell them what they should do. And that's our opportunity next, because if we're going to break down these silos, we've got to have a very serious, direct, and honest conversation. So I am beyond delighted to introduce our next primer speaker. Lawton Penn is at Davis Wright Tremaine. Anybody who knows anything about law knows that name. And it's one of the largest law firms in the U.S. And they have both an innovation partner, who's not here today, and they have Lawton Penn, who is the client service innovation partner. Think about that. What law firm do you know that has a client service innovation partner and who's willing to dedicate the time, energy, and expertise of a partner to work with clients to improve the delivery of legal services through innovation? That's Lawton Penn. Join us, please.
Great. Thanks, Larry. All right. This is such a fabulous program so far, and I really appreciate Kat, Larry, and JB for hosting it and including us. It's wonderful. Thank you. Let's see if I can get the... There we go. Okay. Let's start with 3 questions. What if lawyers could no longer compete on price, quality, or experience? How would we distinguish ourselves? Second question. What if we now had to deliver all legal advice in no more than 3-sentence chunks? No more words. How would we do that? Or the third question. Legal knowledge, forms, templates, it's largely free and available to all. Okay, now what do we sell? So these are examples of what we call intelligent constraints or ridiculous constraints. And they actually can inspire creative thinking. So it's sort of interesting. We normally think of constraints as prohibitions, things that are holding us back. But research has shown that when you impose a really crazy restraint like this, it actually encourages bigger picture thinking because you remove the status quo as one of your available options. And we used those kind of questions and a host of others at our all-attorney retreat last year, and it really was useful for inspiring some very creative thinking. And it seems a little counterintuitive that if you impose a constraint, it's going to cause you to think more broadly. But in fact, when you think about it, if you have an obvious path, then you take it. And all you're thinking about while you're getting from A to B is the path you're on. You might optimize it a little bit, but you're not actually thinking about creating a new path. And what we find is if you remove the obvious path, then suddenly magical things happen. So it's almost like you become a kid again. You know, imagine that game where you're supposed to get from here to there, but now it's hot lava. And that gap you got to jump over is a swamp full of alligators. So we're having a lot of fun thinking about these questions, and I'll talk today about how those very questions have inspired some of the new ways we're serving clients at our firm. And why am I even talking about these constraints? Lawyers and what we do and what customers need from us, what our clients need from us, whether those are corporations or individuals, those who can pay $500 an hour or those who can pay nothing, They need legal services to be more cost-effective, more tech-enabled, more useful. The path that we've been on isn't going to get us there. These ridiculous constraints, we need to think of these as really fun problems to solve, just like kids do when they play those video games. Those obstacles, those are goals. Those challenges, those are really fun things to have to overcome. And that's how we're going to have to start approaching it. Recently, I heard a really successful CEO pose the question, and he posed it really in a rhetorical fashion. He said, what company would possibly design a product and expect that for 20 years, without change, it would meet consumer needs? I sat there thinking what you're all thinking, lawyers! And I sunk down in my chair. Not only has it looked the same for 20 years, it's looked the same for 200 years. Think about it. It has not really changed. He then, and again, I want to be fair. It's not our fault. It's our training. We're trained to anchor our ideas and our arguments in precedent, to go find something to validate, to hook onto. We aren't trained to venture into new territory that is uncharted. We're not trained to go create something that never before existed. But the CEO then went on and he said, on any given day, our company needs to be prepared to blow itself up and reinvent if we're going to have any chance of remaining relevant to consumers. But last I checked, I'm not seeing law firms and law schools as part of their strategy plans to blow up the existing model and reinvent ourselves. So after over 25 years of practicing law, I've sort of come to the conclusion that the best thing I can do is stop thinking like a lawyer and start having a lot more creative energy, having more fun. I've been passionately dissatisfied since probably the second year I walked into our law firm, and it's a great law firm. But I looked around and thought, you've got to be kidding. This is how it's done. We sold a lot of waste, Larry, and we still do. And so it's fun to finally have an opportunity to make a difference and change it. But once you open your eyes, you can't go back. I see opportunities everywhere for law schools, law firms, clients, and technology to all work better to solve these problems. I loved, I think it was, I can't remember who the panelist was, but I think I started as a germ, starting to actually just start doing things differently. We now have an island, which is our DWT de novo team. I'll tell you about in a moment. But I love the salt. I think it needs to be sprinkled in everything we do. I love this quote. We can't solve our problems using the same kind of thinking that created them. So let me just tell a really brief story about when it got real for me. I was wrapping up a meeting with the general counsel, and I'd come down to talk about all the great legal work we'd been doing. We wrapped up. I said, where are you going next? And he said, I'm going to meet with the CFO, and I'm going to get hammered. I'm not looking forward to this. He goes, we went over budget. And I looked at him, I said, but we had a really great year. And he said, I know, but I don't have any way to show it. How do you show the value of dodged bullets? He goes, you know, it's kind of embarrassing. I walk into meetings every week with the team of executives, and they come in with data, visuals, return on investment. I walk in with my yellow legal pad. He said, they're managing budgets to within 0.5%, and these are like $500 million budgets. I can't tell them what bills I'm going to get next month from my law firms. He said, then they make recommendations. They back it up with data and consumer feedback. He said, I just say, trust me, my experience. What that moment really taught for me is, as important as I thought the legal work was, and it is important, it is foundational. What he was worrying about on any given day, I wasn't doing anything to help him with. Our firm really wasn't helping solve problems for our clients. And that led us to these three realizations that have really shifted how we think about work at our firm. First, you can get the legal answer right and not even come close to solving the problem. And those are supposed to be little exclamation points with a slash, but got a little shifted here. Second, we can answer a legal solution. We can come up with a legal solution, but it's not actually getting at the full business problem. These legal solutions are just one input that are going to be blended in with all sorts of other perspectives around the company. And then, most importantly, solving these complex problems, it's not going to be because we throw more lawyers at it. It's going to be because we've introduced other skill sets, different perspectives. Until I started working with the DWT de novo team, I think in about 23 years of practice, anytime we came together to solve a problem, it was lawyers around the table. Now it's usually I'm the only lawyer around the table that is a practicing lawyer, and it's really improved our problem solving. So what we do now at our firm is we have this team called DWT de novo. It's got, you know, I love the term. I've heard legal engineer, technologist, legal technologist. We call them legal solutions architects. And I introduce them as the lawyers of the future. And I'm so thrilled that Vanderbilt Law is creating more of these lawyers of the future. What they are is traditionally trained lawyers, but they also love data. They're fearless about applying technology to solve legal problems. They are really well trained in process mapping and thinking about law as systems. And they're bringing a lot of fresh energy. And I think of them as our guides, our translators, the ones who connect dots for us. Because the way we look at things is you have the law at the top. That's the bespoke, very important, crucial part of all of this. And I love that statement. Yeah, we are still lawyers. But then we need to put in a healthy dose of process improvement at the foundation. We need to think about how people can be used, have better skill-task alignment, get the right folks with the right skill sets. Look to technology. We don't start with technology. Really, it's if we can't solve this problem with more efficient processes and different people, then we're going to figure out where we can incorporate technology, because it tends to be the hardest thing to introduce, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then data, lots of data. We need to know if our improved processes are continuing to improve. We need to report on all the great work we're doing, know where it's tracking along in its life cycle, and generate some business insights for our clients. So that's been probably the area that I've seen the most growth and excitement around, is using data with our clients. So let me share with you a few of the things we've been working on, and I'm going to sort of think about, from a legal education standpoint, what I would encourage law schools to be focused on. The first one would be process. Lawyers like to think that everything we do is this special snowflake requiring a custom approach. What I've observed in practice is there is a lot of it that is more repeatable than we'd like to admit. But once you see it, it's full of amazing opportunity. And we've really started to challenge this notion with our lawyers that everything has to be special and customized. The reason we care about process, our clients do. They want things to be efficient. Everybody has very, precious resources, whether you're doing access to justice projects or you're running a Fortune 10 company. You're trying to stretch your resources, and the way you do that is through more efficient processes and be able to see what part's repeatable and what requires the custom. You also have to understand process in order to know who's the right person at the right point. They need to know what is their sphere of responsibility so you can delegate effectively. So we've had a lot of really wonderful, eye-opening moments with our lawyers doing process mapping. Had a very seasoned litigator recently say to our entire sort of partner meeting, it was the most fun thing he'd done in his career. I was like, yes. I mean, and he was a skeptic. He was not looking forward to this meeting. And he walked in and he came out just thrilled. So we've been doing process maps from the super messy. This is done with a client and the client team around some cloud services agreements. This one was the one that the lawyer said was the most fun thing he had. I think he'd just never seen so much color in one place. And this was a process map that we used to handle what's now been 2,600 subpoenas in 14 months without missing a beat. With that kind of volume, you've got to have very clean processes. This is all about handling employment investigations for a large company, a more polished version of a process map. And then this was kind of fun. We brought our team and thought of the gamification kind of approach and created a process map that really was our client experience roadmap. All the places that our client will touch our law firm and where we can totally bomb out the relationship if we mess it up, and what are all the places we can pick up some stars. And what was super interesting when we presented this is to realize that in that cloud was really just the legal services being produced, but there are so many touch points before and after the actual legal work product. So remember the questions I posed at the beginning. I think process mapping hits all three. When you can sit with a client and you can find efficiencies for them, you're adding value that goes beyond your legal expertise. You're giving them business insights, things they didn't know about themselves. You're using visuals to communicate a legal process. And because we're lawyers and understand the process, we're able to deliver value even if ultimately the legal knowledge, the legal answers, end up being free. So process mapping, process engineering, knowing how to use Visio and the various sort of tools, I think is a really helpful skill and is within reach of law students and lawyers. So speaking of business insights, that third question, legal services are now free. We have clients all the time say, tell me something about ourselves that we don't know. You see so much that I don't see. Give us insights. They're really hungry for that. And the way you get at that is if you are handling portfolios of work for clients, you need to think at the beginning, how can we extract data out of what we're doing? What would be the questions we might want to be able to answer at the end? Very hard to do it retroactively. And you have to work with the client. You have to find out what are those pain points, those questions, what are you getting asked to produce that your business clients think you should be able to produce in-house counsel, but you can't put your hands on. And the tools that our lawyers need here is you got to understand Excel. I am horrible at Excel, and I keep pledging to go learn Excel and do it better, but that is foundational to being able to then do the data visualization. And we're using a lot of data visualization tools like Tableau and Microsoft's Power BI and Pyramid Analytics, and it's a huge crowd pleaser. So I'll tell you one quick story. Handling a huge portfolio of contracts. The in-house legal team had a very impatient business team, wondering why these contracts were taking so long. We'd been capturing data all along the way, and we were able to share with them after a period of time to get enough data that 80% of all the delay in these contracts was over two provisions: indemnification, choice of law. We said to the client, have you ever litigated these contracts, the indemnification and choice of law? Has that ever come up? Nobody could remember any point in time, we could go back about 15 years, where anyone ever litigated. And we said, would you? It's like, no, these are our customers. Way too important. We're not going to sue our customers. Okay, so you take that data back to the business. You say, okay, here's some data to help you make an informed decision. Do we want to mitigate a theoretical risk that has never come up in 15 years, but you tell us is important, or would you rather have your contracts 80% faster? What do you think they chose? That data was so helpful to crystallize and change process. Another instance, we had a group where the in-house counsel felt like, and I probably advanced this a little too quickly, but it's kind of pretty. So in-house counsel had a problem where one work group was kicking off so many employment claims, but he couldn't get their attention. So we collected a bunch of data, and we went back in and were able to show that this tiny work group that was 10% of the workforce was kicking off almost 50% of all their spend on employment matters. And we created a bubble chart. I didn't use the real one because of the client data, but it looked very similar to this if you look at the first column, and there the blue dot. A very simple bubble chart showing how far out of whack this group was. He walked into the business person, and the business person immediately shifted from stay out of my business to who else has seen this? How do we fix it? Business people don't want to be special in that way. So we got in some cultural improvement experts, which that was a big deal for this group. And over time, actually, the bubbles started coming down and shrinking. And so it was a wonderful way to visually depict progress that was actually a very complex sort of undertaking for them. So shifting to these visuals, that question I asked, we can't use words. We can't use more than 3-sentence chunks. How do we make law more visual? I heard a general counsel once say, my folks are in the business of making decisions, not analyzing issues. I need quick visuals to make decisions. So we're having, here just a few quick examples. This was an example where we had a client come to us and say, we're trying to figure out if we have a gender pay equity issue. And this is fake data, just to not be worried. And our associate started creating pivot tables in Excel, and it just was this big mess, and started a nice Word document to deliver this information back. And we said, well, how about we put it in Microsoft's Power BI? And we created a dashboard where they could quickly filter by city, by job group, and figure out, are the women getting 89 cents on the dollar, 112 cents on the dollar? It's just a way to interact. That was a real easy way to kind of digest what otherwise would have been in very complex Word tables or Excel. In another instance, we had a partner walk in and said, here is a list of trademarks we handle for a client. It went to 100 pages. She said, every quarter I meet with a client, I print this out. I make 6 copies, so we have a copy for everyone around the room. And I bring 2 sets, one where it's sorted by one version, the other where it's sorted a different way. And we sat there and just went, oh my goodness. So we created a interactive, it's stalling out, trademark map of the world. You can click by what mark, what country. You can figure out, there's a calendar feature of when marks will need to be re-registered. And it just allows, she just brings this, puts it up on the screen, and works through it. We used fake Nintendo names here. So we got Donkey Kong and Disco Kid. And finally, another situation, we had a client, financial services institution, that said, we want you to research 28 countries, 28 different issues. These are questions like, can we charge a surcharge on a prepaid Visa card? Can we charge an ATM withdrawal fee? They needed it for 2 points in time, what's currently and what's emerging, and 4 levels of detail. We want thumbnail sketches, we want a risk assessment in red, yellow, or green, and we want the full narrative. That's a lot of information. The inclination of the partner was to get a huge sort of, I don't know if it's going to be a PDF or a Word document, but what we added value with was talking about structured data. When we go out to these firms around the world, let's pull this information back in a structured way that we might then visualize it. And sure enough, we came up with, yet again, another map of the world. Maps are fun. And what you saw is under the filter by issue, we had all 28 issues. We had the different regions, and we had an assessment from the lawyers about whether it was a high, medium, or low risk of getting in trouble with regulators if you did this. This has now become the place the business folks go first when trying to decide, do we want to enter into this kind of issue in China? They can see that right now the current situation is we're good, no regulations. But if you click to emerging, there's some pending legislation that's going to impact how easy it will be to do this business. And then they can click through the full narrative if they want translated into English. So a few words on technology as we kind of wrap up here. These are off-the-shelf tools. We are simply thinking about them as a different way to produce legal work. We aren't designing tech. We don't have the resources. We don't know how. So we do need to, though, start partnering better with legal technology. I have so much empathy for legal technology trying to sell into our space. Law firms don't spend money easily. Corporate departments that are law departments, they are like the cobbler's children that have no shoes. I mean, if you're not technology relating to the core business, you know, running an airline, running a financial services, it's very hard. Where I have seen the best success is where we have existing work we're already doing for a client, and we've hacked our way as far as we can go with some available tools off the shelf, often used in ways they weren't designed for. And then we have a legal tech company that's willing to beta test with us and start experimenting. So those 2,600 subpoenas, we got as far as we could get using basic data visualization, and now we're partnering with an AI company that wants to test how we might analyze and sort those and triage them. That gender pay equity tool, we're now partnering as with a much more sophisticated gender statistical analysis tool. So I think that's the key, is we need our law schools to start training on a few more of these sort of data visualization, process mapping. I love just learn the word suite well. And then technology to come in and just keep talking. And when we find sort of these actual client use cases, beta test, get that going. I think it's very hard to just come in and sell a solution without really understanding what the problem is that we're currently working on that's live and you've got an engaged client and engaged partners. So I'm going to wrap up with one of my favorite quotes that I saw at my very first Evolve Law conference that Mary Jutton in the back hosted. And it said, instead of asking what questions we should be asking, what we really need to be focused on is what answers we should be questioning. So thank you.
Thank you, Lawton.
Oh.
If you're a client, how many of you would like to work with a law firm that is actually trying to help you spend less money on them? Right? And I know some law firms that are here today that are committed to do exactly that. And Lawton is an example, a high-level example of how law firms can now innovate by giving value to their clients, which costs less money. So as our next group of Igniter speakers, J.B. Rule, Joe Green, Andy Dawes, and Ann Pruitt come take their places in the chairs, if they will, I would appreciate that. Let me also say that something that you said, Lawton, was really resonating with me. Kat and I have the wonderful privilege of teaching some of these law students who totally get it. They don't have to be told anything new because they come in wondering why it's done the way it is. We had a legal project management course that we just concluded, and one of our law students, after spending 10 weeks going through the process mapping and coming up with a product plan and a project management plan, exclaimed in the middle of class one day, "Why don't all our law firms do this? It's more profitable." Wow, that's a law student that I want to unleash on the world. Because when you understand and make that crossover to the other side, where value is more valuable than waste, there's a world of opportunity. And thank you for helping us realize that, Lawton. Appreciate that very much.
Great, thank you.
So now we have the Igniters, but first of all, if you're worried if these were real cows one time, please don't worry anymore. They're polyester hides. So all of the PETA people can rest easy, okay? They're just polyester, okay? Yeah, we killed a few polyesters, I'm sorry. But now we're going to hear from the folks who are going to speak into the practice of law. And it's a wonderful array. I'll introduce them individually. J.B. Rule is my colleague and who is the director, as I said earlier, of the program on law and innovation. This man is a true academic. So he writes, he speaks, he travels the world on someone else's dime. How cool is that? JB, speak to us if you will. Feel free to use the podium, sit in your chairs. There's a clicker beside you if you prefer sitting. It's all up to you. There should be a clicker on the, that's a technical term for a, there's a word for it. It's called a, excuse me? Yes, it's a slide advancer or a clicker.
Okay.
Just push the green button and you're off and running.
All right. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everyone. First of all, just as representative of the program, this is fabulous. Welcome to Vanderbilt and to this wonderful program that Larry and Kat have designed. So I'm on the faculty at the law school. I teach property law in the first year, real old school, you know, Pearson versus Post, the Fox, and all that. I also teach a seminar on the food system. It maps the entire system of getting food onto our tables, and we look at trade, labor, you name it. I have tons of fun with that class. I was actually hired by Vanderbilt to teach environmental law, but I don't teach that anymore because about 5 years ago, Chris Guthrie and I invented another class called Law 2050, and it essentially puts law students into a mode where they think, how am I going to get to where I want to be in the year 2050? We're going to have to change the name if I last long enough and keep teaching it. But, and we look at many trends that are transforming the legal industry, technology, the changing relationship between clients and law firms, alternative legal services providers that are coming online. You name it, we look at it. We have 20 to 25 guest speakers a year. It's a fire hose of a class. Andy's been a guest speaker. You want to be a guest speaker, just email me, we'll get you in the class, okay? That class is what more or less led to the creation of the program on law and innovation that started about 4 years ago with Larry and me, kind of as a skunk works, building out courses. Kat became an important part of that, and as Larry explained, is now our Director of Innovation Design. Like some of you, I am also the co-founder of a legal tech company, startup company. We're trying to build predictive analytics using AI, topic modeling, neural nets, et cetera, to bring solutions to particular legal and financial problems. So in other words, we're building AI for law. That's not the topic of my talk, though. Okay? The topic of my talk is law for AI. And I believe that anyone in this room, everyone trying to build AI for law, has a responsibility to build law for AI. Right? And the question is, has the train left the station? Yes, it has. How far down the track is it, and how fast is it moving? We're in big catch-up mode. Well, the question is, you know, we hear a lot about AI. How fast is the train moving? Some people have likened it to a bullet train, right? The moment you see it coming, it's already blown past you. This is a little cartoon. If you can't read it, there are people at the human level intelligence station saying, hey, look, AI is arriving. It's coming fast, and then it's blown past them. Is it moving that fast? Well, you know, the counter to that is, no, this is a bunch of hype. I don't know which it is. I think there's a little bit of truth to both of those, but I know this much. We have concerns. AI is being used for a lot of different applications, and some of us, many of us, are concerned about the train has left the station and we're not thinking clearly about law for AI. So I want to take you on a little journey of my thinking about this topic, right? So, right, and this was just the other day, the Brookings Institute has basically said, AI is going to transform the world. We ought to think about policy and law and regulation. Might be a good idea. So, you know, before I got to Vanderbilt, if you'd asked me, what about law for AI? I'd say, well, there's AI and there's law. I'm not really sure what the law for AI is. I got to thinking about it, and like all good law professors, you know, I can put anything after the law and anything, right? So law and artificial intelligence. There must be something out there to work with. I started to think a little more, I hope, deeply about it. I thought, well, right, there's AI for law, right? People in the room are building those solutions, but there has to be law for AI. At that point, I thought, okay, I want to learn more about this. The great thing about being a law professor is you decide you're interested in something, you can do something about it to educate yourself. So 3 years ago, I convened the first Law and AI conference at Vanderbilt. It's a small workshop, brings in computer scientists, technologists, lawyers, legal academics. Larry and I like to call it a pracademic conference. We want actual technologists. Andy has been at the conference. We had people from Andrew Arruda from Ross was at our first one. And so we started to think about, well, how do we define this space, right? So for our second conference, I said, look, it's not just law for AI and AI for law. We need to think about how we build out and fill in these boxes, right? We need research and theory. We need practice and application for AI for law and law for AI. I thought, well, how do I fill in those boxes as a legal academic? How do I learn? There is an organization called Social Science Research Network. And basically, it's for academics and practitioners. It basically collects and disseminates papers on topics. And I thought, well, surely SSRN, and they're huge. Right? It's run by Elsevier. They must have an artificial and intelligence law journal, right, that you subscribe to, and they send you papers that get indexed under that topic. So I have them for all my other areas as well: food, environment, property. So I searched around in their index of journals, and they don't have them. I said, well, that can't be right. So I called SSRN and said, hey, where's your artificial intelligence and law journal? They said, well, we don't have one. I said, okay, I'll start one. And they said, well, you think anyone's really going to write about that? I said, I think so. I really do. And I told them, well, I'll tell you what, you have archives. Just punch in these keywords and see how many papers show up: machine learning, computational topic modeling, neural nets, etc. They called back a few days later and said, oh, we're in, okay. We now have 750 papers that have been published in the last year in this journal on topics like, right, big data, machine judges, and legitimacy of criminal justice system. This is a huge issue in the criminal justice system. Automated vehicles, rethinking just basic corporate law using artificial intelligence, regulatory technology. How will the administrative state use technology to regulate? Preventing autonomous weapon systems, right? I'd say probably 20% of the articles are on autonomous weapons. If you want to, if you don't want to stay up late at night scared, don't read those articles. I'd say probably another 20% are on autonomous vehicles, and then a lot on criminal justice system. So with a lot of issues out there that fall under the rubric of law for AI. So then, after a year of editing this journal, deciding which articles should go in, looking at the abstracts, I kind of developed a little bit of an advancement of that matrix that I showed you. Well, I can't go backwards, but anyway, the 4-box. So now I think of it this way. There's a lot there, right? The rows represent to me the spaces of law for AI. There's AI for lawyers. That's a big interest of everyone here in the room, right? But there's also AI for legal administration. How will courts, agencies, and other institutions that administer the law use AI? And then there's law for AI. How will we design law that regulates, right? These things can, go wrong. How do we get the best and avoid the worst? And then ironically, it may be that the best way to create law for AI is to use AI to make AI obey the law. And across the top, I think the development of law for AI, ideally, would follow a progression of, first we have theoretical questions. What is AI? Is it practicing law or not practicing law if it's used by lawyers, right? Can AI judge? Then, if we have a theory, we need some ethics. What are the ethics of AI? Then how do we translate those ethics into policy? And once we have policy, we've made decisions about what we want. The hard part is then turning that into law, right? Drafting statutes, drafting regulations. How will the law actually implement the policy that ought to implement ethics, that ought to be informed by the theory? And then we have a practice. What's the real world doing with this law for AI? And then at some point, we ought to be able to look back and reflect on the experience and ask, are we doing a good job? How well are we regulating AI? Maybe we need to go rethink the policy, the law, etc. Now, AI for law is coming online fast. I don't want to talk about that. I think it's great. But the problem is law for AI is just beginning. This is a New York City ordinance that it's like, wait, maybe we ought to think about agencies who are using automated decision systems and machine learning to make decisions. Are they doing that? Do we want to regulate that? Sure, we ought to at least have some kind of a policy about agencies making decisions about housing, bail, probation, access to jobs, etc., using machine learning. This is so far our sole federal initiative. It's a bill not yet passed in Congress, and the first time Congress ever thinks about something, what do? They create a task force. So we now have, a bill to create a task force to think about this. Right? The train is way down the track, and we're just starting to think about it. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, just a few weeks ago, came out with a report thinking about the torts of the future. They're actually anticipating, and very prominent in that report are robotics and artificial intelligence. What kind of torts are the businesses that are building robotics and artificial intelligence going to face? And just a couple of weeks ago, while I was in London on someone else's dime, the House of Lords issued AI in the UK, Ready and Willing and Able. It's a 100-page report on how government in the UK should think about the proliferation of AI in society and the economy. So there's a lot of work to be done on building out law for AI. I think we all have a responsibility to ensure it is built robustly, responsibly, based on ethical decisions we make as a society. I think the real hard work is what I've highlighted there, right? It's the intersection of policy, law, and practice with AI for legal administration, law for AI, and how much AI is going to take over the actual law for AI. That is what I want to focus on within Vanderbilt Law School. We're hoping in Law 2050 and a new AI and law course that a colleague of mine is going to teach to fill in some of the boxes and get our students to the point where when they leave Vanderbilt Law School and they're experiencing all of the AI for law, they're also thinking about responsible law for AI. Thank you.
So next I'm going to ask Joe Green to join us, and you'll notice that LexisNexis got top billing in the first session, and now Thomson Reuters. It's purely alphabetical. It has nothing to do with priority. Joe Green is an editor, the senior editor, for Thomson Reuters Practical Law, and an author, a writer. He's recently publishing, or is in the process of publishing, a phenomenal text for the legal education world. And Joe, thank you. Add to our conversation.
Great. Thanks, Larry. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Really appreciate joining the chorus of thanks to Larry and Kat for organizing this great event and for including me. Those aren't my slides. Are they? Yes, they are. They look a little weird. Okay. We'll see how this goes. So many of us are here today because we want to help lawyers better serve their clients, in many cases by leveraging new technologies. And our timing is excellent, I think, because there's increasing interest in the legal industry in using technology platforms to help guide lawyers through performing their day-to-day tasks in order to enhance their ability to deliver high-quality and cost-effective legal services. When we think about how to best design these new platforms, though, what we should really be focused on, I think, at a fundamental level is how to improve the performance of lawyers. And so today, in this talk, I'd like to briefly introduce you to an entire field, which you may or may not even be aware of, that's devoted to improving performance in students and workers. The field's called instructional design. So what is instructional design? It's an interdisciplinary subject area that sits at the intersection of education, business, technology, psychology, and design. At its core, it's a systematic process for improving learning and performance. So it enables us to do a job more efficiently and effectively. There are a lot of characteristics of instructional design. You can see a lot of them in this word cloud that I created. For instance, it puts learners at the center of the process, and it makes it a priority to establish clear goals. But I think the two most important characteristics that we should take away about instructional design are that it's empirical, so it meaning that instructional designers collect data to see whether their attempts to improve performance are actually effective, and it's iterative, in the sense that at each step of the process of designing and implementing instruction, instructional designers are incorporating what they've learned from collecting those data. The systematic process of instructional design involves a number of steps that will be familiar, presumably, to many of you in this room who are steeped in design thinking, and I'm sure the rest of you will be by the time we leave today. The first step is to methodically and rigorously analyze a learning or performance problem. The analysis is followed by designing an intervention, developing it, implementing it, and then most importantly, evaluating it, and using that evaluation to iteratively improve on the instruction based on hard data that's collected. This approach, which in instructional design circles goes by the acronym ADDIE, it may sound like common sense when you look at it. It doesn't seem that complicated. But in practice, it's rarely applied in most instructional situations where professional instructional designers aren't involved. I think it's important to know that instructional design isn't just a theoretical, pie-in-the-sky, ivory tower type of field. There are literally thousands of instructional designers that have been working on overcoming a wide variety of performance problems out in the real world for decades. Perhaps unsurprisingly, they're quite often found in education, where they help teachers develop new courses, especially online offerings. I myself worked with instructional designers when I was designing two new startup law courses for a new master's program, online master's program. But instructional design as a field actually first got its start in government, not in education, when the US military deployed educational psychologists to help develop training programs for the massive influx of new recruits all the way back during World War II. And today, militaries from around the world, such as Singapore and Australia, just to name a few examples, send officers to U.S. colleges to learn instructional design. The U.S. Coast Guard has been working with instructional designers for 30 years. So it's very prominent in the government sector. And then instructional designers are also found all over in business and industry, where they help large companies with workforce training and performance improvement, overcoming performance problems. KPMG, for example, has instructional design consultants that they send out to KPMG clients to improve their training programs. AT&T has hired in-house instructional designers. They were one of the first companies to do so. They actually, years ago, cut down on the number of hours of training that their linesmen needed, safety training, from 45 hours to 9 hours with no reduction in safety and increase in on-the-job injuries, which is pretty incredible, from 45 hours to 9 hours, the amount of savings there just by tweaking the instruction. There are hundreds more instructional design success stories like AT&T's, but I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to move it along. So at this point, you may be asking yourself, this sounds very interesting and all, but how exactly is this relevant for a conference on legal innovation? That's a fair question. Throughout my career as a practicing corporate lawyer, I worked with startup companies, venture capitalists for the bulk of my career before moving to practical law. But throughout my career when I was practicing, inevitably on every transaction that I worked on, sometimes many times on a given transaction, the senior-most lawyers would encounter some issue that was outside their comfort zone or outside their working memory. And the inevitable response to the rest of the team from that lawyer would be, all right, guys, we need to get smart on this issue. So the way I see it, much of the practice of law actually involves learning about a set of issues well enough to make a judgment about the best outcome, the best course of action, and then to educate a client so that they can ultimately make an informed decision as to whether or not to follow your advice. So a large part of the processes that the legal tech platforms of the future will need to help lawyers work through are in fact educational in nature. First, the lawyer needs to get smart, and then the lawyer needs to educate the client. So because legal practice is educational in nature, there are two specific concepts from instructional design that I think are of particular relevance for those of us that are seeking to improve how lawyers work. Those two concepts are performance support and microlearning. Lawyers have been using performance support tools for years. You think of annotated form documents and closing checklists, very much like the ones that I create for a living at Practical Law. Outside of law, GPS navigation is kind of a classic and good illustrative example of performance support. So this slide, I don't know how well you can see it, but it shows the directions that I'm going to have to take to get from here to the airport after I leave. You know, I have Google Maps, so I can pretty much guarantee you that, you know, I will not be able to tell you how I got to the airport after following those instructions. I will do whatever it tells me to do, and I will get from here to the airport. And then the next time that I need to make that trip, I will have to use Google Maps again. So it's a good example of performance support because the function of performance support is not to learn something necessarily. It's just to help you get the job done. You don't have to necessarily know how you did it. As long as you have the support, you can get the job done. Microlearning, on the other hand, actually involves learning, as the name suggests. With microlearning, the goal is to learn something discrete, completely, but in a pretty short period of time. So I like to think of this as microlearning as the YouTube video, short YouTube video that teaches you how to do something like, I don't know, tying a bow tie or something like that, versus a Coursera course. Many online courses nowadays, you know, take an hour or 2 hour long lecture and then chop it up into 4 or 5 minute increments. That's not microlearning. That's just short videos of an hour long lecture. So it's really a complete learning experience that gets you through a particular topic. Embedding performance support and microlearning materials into legal technology platforms, I think can really help lawyers be far more efficient and consistent practitioners. But the revolutionary thing that you can do with this is, I think, pushing the information and knowledge that's required to perform legal tasks to lawyers at the point of need, which is a crucial part of performance support, is that it's available at the point of need. It's not something you get trained on and then you go do. It's something that you have while you're actually doing the work. So pushing that information to lawyers at the point of need through technology platforms, instead of the status quo where lawyers spend a huge chunk of their time pulling that information and having, you know, sifting through it and then having to make sense of it, has the potential, I think, to be really transformative to the way that lawyers practice. But it's important for us to realize that Legal subject matter experts working with technologists alone likely won't be sufficient. They likely won't have the pedagogical expertise to deliver that information effectively. But with instructional designers on the team, they will be able to do so. So whether legal innovators are trying to improve performance through using microlearning, performance support, or the myriad other great tools and helpful tools from the field of instructional design, leveraging the expertise of professional instructional designers will be really crucial. And that's what I hope you take away from my talk today. Thanks.
And if you notice, the speakers are looking nervously down at their left because there's a big clock here that says you have 28 seconds left.
Nailed it.
Yeah, you did. And then it starts flashing red, and they don't want to see what happens after that. So we're doing great, thank you. And if you're worried about time and you're looking at your calendar, your schedule, don't worry. 12:15, you need to translate to 12:45, and all is well. Okay, we're doing great. Andy Dawes, a dear friend that I first met when Riverview Law started back in 2012, and we became virtual friends, and he became a U.S. guy working on behalf of that law firm in the UK that wasn't built, owned, or run by lawyers, but by business people. What a concept. The ABS structure is what created that capacity, and Riverview Law was the first. And then came Kim Technologies, which is a subsidiary and a technology application that Andy's been responsible for, co-founded and launched. And what Kim does, you're going to hear more about because it has a very applicable purpose for practitioners. And Andy and I have become close, dear friends. He's one of my finest friends, as many of you are, who we've gotten to know over time. This is what's happening in this industry. So, Andy, help us.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. So I thought I'd start off with a little quiz. I'm not expecting you to answer it necessarily, but the question is, what do the four things on the screen have in common? We've got a radio, a television, the internet, and Pokemon Go. The answer is that at one point or another, they've all accumulated a user base of 50 million people. It took 38 years for radio to achieve that. Just 13 for television. The internet did it in just 4. Pokemon Go, 19 days. So we're seeing this huge acceleration of technology, digital transformation that is affecting all of us in the lives clearly that we lead, and having a direct impact on everything around us, the businesses that we work within, the law firms that we work within, even academia. And what we're seeing is a shrinking S-curve. So you'll be familiar, many of you I'm sure, with the traditional S-curve of growth against time. It's been fairly well plotted over many, many years now. But this digital transformation is causing pressure to the left and right of that curve and shrinking it and pushing it from both sides so that we're seeing a narrower curve. So the time within which our businesses, our law firms, our organizations have to enjoy the success part of the curve is far, far less than it used to be. And a great example of that would be Uber, for example. So Uber, founded about 9 years ago now, I think it was, already valued in excess of $60 billion. So a valuation that exceeds that of the likes of Ford, Time Warner, General Motors, 9 years old, but already recognizing that it's kind of heading towards the end of that first step of its curve. There's an existential threat on the horizon for this $60 billion outfit, and that is autonomous vehicles, right, which completely undermine and change, potentially, the business model on which it's grown so successful thus far. The S&P 500 index, in 1965, the average length of time that a company would stay within the index was 33 years. That had come down to 20 years by 1990, and is forecast by 2026 to be just 14 years. So on the current trajectory, about half of the companies in the S&P 500 at the moment will be displaced within the next 10 years. Now that's huge, right? I mean, that affects all of us in the room. We like to think that law is a little special, and some of the other speakers have alluded to this, right? And it is special, but it's not different from all the other things that are going on out there, right? It succumbs to the same market forces, the same pressures that all these other businesses are succumbing to. Those of you that are working in-house, the businesses you're working within, these are the conversations that are clearly happening. I'm sure you're involved in them sometimes around the boardroom table. Change is hugely affecting all of us. We used to say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Realistically, we're now in an age, if it ain't broke, it soon will be. Reinvention is what everybody's running to, right, to cure this. We've talked a little bit about how Uber are doing that already. Just a few other examples here. So General Electric recently rebranded itself as the world's digital industrial company. Much broader. It's all about digital. It's all about digital transformation. McLaren, Formula One, amazing Formula One racing company. Some of you may be into that. So McLaren recently came out and described and said, no, we're not just a racing car company. We're actually McLaren Technology Group. The racing car stuff is just a part of what we do. But we've got all this other technology that we built to support the racing cars, and we're going to start applying that in other areas of business as well. We're a technology group. And then last, and in good company, clearly, Riverview Law, the UK law firm that Larry referenced earlier on, born out of the Legal Services Act in the UK of 2012, affectionately known as Tesco Law. So Tesco, one of the largest grocery chains in the UK, and the notion was that as the UK government stirred things up to try and create competition and innovation in the legal space, that somebody like a Tesco would likely come along and start delivering legal services. So everybody started referring to it as Tesco Law. They didn't, as it happens, but one of the other large chains did, and many others. In fact, over 500 alternative business structures in the UK now who are owned and managed, in many cases, by people that are not lawyers. I'm going to avoid saying non-lawyers as much as I can. But the law, of course, is done by lawyers, but these are regulated entities. In fact, you've got some interesting, the Big Four, for example, have moved into this space. PwC, who recently, of course, announced that they were opening a law firm themselves in the US, in Washington, D.C. So if you're not familiar with that, worth looking into some of the innovation that's happening in that space with ILC Legal, and lots happening around there. LegalZoom have used this construct to move into the UK, have acquired at least one, if not more, law firms now in the UK. And one of the first things they did in those law firms, I know the guys at LegalZoom quite well, was the kind of process mapping that we heard Lawton talk about earlier on, that goes on within DWT and elsewhere. Get into the firm, work out what's efficient, what's not, how do we improve those efficiencies. One of the big challenges here is that efficiency, of course, is the enemy of the billable hour. Let's call it as it is, right? How can I maintain my number of hours if I'm actually trying to reduce my number of hours? It doesn't make sense, right? So you need to rethink the way that law firms that for decades, if not centuries, have kind of framed that construct and the structures that they've built around the way that they work with customers. So Riverview had a huge advantage, of course. It started with a blank slate. Able to ask the question, if we were to form and create a law firm for the 21st century, what would it look like? Where would we begin? Had the luxury of, it was, I think Clayton Christensen was mentioned earlier on by Dean Guthrie. You know, one of Christensen's theories here is that actually within organizations that have been going for any length of time, they have so many embedded people, processes, and resources that it is virtually impossible to actually make the kind of changes that are necessary when you're faced with disruptive innovation and disruptors in the marketplace. It's the innovator's dilemma, as he calls it. Excuse me. So Riverview didn't have that, didn't have that challenge. It was able to ask, how do we combine the things that are necessary, the people, the process, and the technology in a way that is fit for 21st century practice of law, in a way that is customer-centric. And their answer to that was actually we need to be technology-centric as well. That actually underlying the people and the processes, technology is the key. So if you start with a unified technology base and become technology-driven, and Riverview Law refers to itself not as a law firm now, but as a technology business primarily with deep legal domain expertise. You see the difference? So technology-driven, because the world is technology-driven. And as much as we might not like to admit it, law is technology-driven increasingly, and it's all about the data. Lots of titles used for this era that we're moving into, whether it's the second machine age or the fourth industrial revolution. I particularly like the age of data because perhaps never, at no other time in history has it been clear, perhaps given the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica news stories recently, of just how critical data is, of how much there is to be mined in the data that passes through our hands and the hands of those that we touch on a daily basis. And again, I think in Lawton's primer talk, this was really coming through loud and clear. There's an awful lot of data that passes through lawyers' hands. Most of it traditionally has been focused on activity, right? Well, how many hours are we billing for this? And how many matters of this kind have we got? But as she actually said, and certainly as in Riverview's experience as well, there's a lot that you can capture before the law part necessarily begins. And right when you think you've concluded the matter at the end of it as well, so that you extend the breadth of what you're looking at, and you capture data that starts to become much more proactive, much more preemptive in nature. You get into the kind of predictive work, into the sort of transition from just focusing on legal to focusing on business. So Riverview's slogan, legal input, business output, very similar to some of the things that Lawton had on one of her slides there. The legal problem solved doesn't necessarily mean the business problem is solved. And joining those two together is critical to the way that we move forward. I think this is probably an accurate description of the data strategy that most law departments and law firms have had in the last decade or so, through no fault of their own. Technology has not been the primary, the legal department has not been the primary recipient of funds for technology investment. There's no two ways about it. And this is kind of what we've ended up with, is a bunch of different silos that don't talk to each other. It's invariably out of date or out of context, and very, very, very difficult to work with. What Riverview did was start from scratch, building on the Kim Technologies platform as an AI base. So platform versus product is a key theme that I would say is one to take away from today's event and one to mull over as you go forward. Having everything in one place instead of creating more silos. You can also fall into the trap of creating AI silos, of course, that don't necessarily talk to each other as well. So platform versus product and configuration versus coding. Emerging technologies mean that it is now possible for non-IT folk, non-developers, to actually create applications very, very quickly and easily. So some of the work that Kim has done with Riverview and with other clients as well is enabling legal team members to create applications in a matter of hours, to automate their own processes, their own workflows, their own documents in hours, reducing in some cases what was predicted to be a 6-month development project for a team of IT developers to a lawyer doing it in an afternoon. So a lot of things are changing, a lot of things that used not to be possible are now possible. And I'd encourage you to look into that, because we're moving into a data-driven economy where it's all about the data, and the train has left the station, as JB's already alluded to, right? We didn't talk beforehand, but I think we're both singing from the same songbook on this one. The train's left the station. The only question really is whether or not you're on the train, or if not, how you're going to board it, because it's not stopping. And again, it had no brakes, right, in your slide. So that's my call to action for you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. And so one of those clients that Andy referred to is in the arena of pro bono. If we have an 80% fall off in this country of people who need legal services and don't get them, there is a huge problem, as well as a huge opportunity. So when we can learn how to do law better, faster, cheaper, there's a market that hasn't even been served. And at the base of that market are those who need pro bono services. And Pruitt, dear friend, again, and she's been all over the world with respect to her legal practice, because she was at Dell in her prior life as an in-house, I would call her an operations counsel. And now she runs the organization in Tennessee that oversees the legal services provided by a number of pro bono providers statewide. And Anne, thank you for being here. Help us.
Thank you. Larry and Kat, what an energizing morning. And right before we slide into lunch, I want to ignite you all in a conversation about a particular kind of wellness, and that's legal wellness. Let's start with how we think about wellness in general. It's defined as the quality or state of being healthy in body and mind, especially with the result of deliberate effort. This is a typical wellness wheel that you've probably seen, and we use it to become more aware of the interconnectedness of each dimension and how together they can help us promote healthy living. There's social wellness, where we contribute to the community and build social networks. Physical wellness, about the benefits of exercise and a healthy diet and self-care. Spiritual wellness, to promote the development of systems, values, and creating a worldview. Occupational wellness focuses on the enrichment of life through work. Emotional wellness focuses on developing self-esteem, self-control, and determination as a sense of direction. Intellectual wellness is creating stimulating mental activities to share our gifts with others. And environmental wellness is about living a lifestyle that's respectful of our surroundings. So today I want to suggest that there's an unmentioned element that cuts through each of these dimensions, and it's essential to achieving our overall wellness. And that is the concept of legal wellness. Legal wellness is about using our knowledge of our legal rights and obligations to protect, advance, and secure our overall wellness. How does one cultivate legal wellness? Preventive medicine provides some good examples. I love this slide, and I think Johnny's probably right. It's more like an app a day than an apple a day to keep the doctor away these days. We're all familiar with the concept of preventive medicine, taking actions designed to promote health and avoid risks of getting sick. I bet most people in this room have some type of app or device that's going to track how many steps we've taken today. I'm an avid consumer of wellness-related technology, and I'm probably also not the only person in this room who maybe has some spicy children. I have 2 spicy teenagers, and I will confess that occasionally my Apple Watch even lights up my wrist and reminds me to breathe. Technology has made it convenient and cost-effective for people to practice each of the dimensions of wellness using tools that are available to us 24/7. A glance at the home screen of my smartphone is proof. From my home screen, I can quickly access the apps I use to work on my wellness anytime I need. Maybe. I have this effect on technology, people. Let's see. Can I get some? There we go. Okay, with LinkedIn, I can focus on my occupational wellness. Headspace helps me work on emotional and spiritual wellness. Love to keep up in touch with my friends, many of you in this room, and my family. That's social wellness on Facebook. Sometimes I can get caught in the office playing brain games on Lumosity or trying to learn something on the go with Audible, a way to work on my intellectual wellness. And my Fitness Pal is a way that I work on tracking my diet and exercise. So what might legal wellness tools look like? Healthcare innovations provide an especially useful example of what legal care innovations will look like. What we see on the medical side of using technology to promote health and wellness is the positive impact of medical resources merging with communication devices. Here are just a few examples. A patient with heart disease receives activity information from their smartphone, sends it to their cardiologist for analysis and treatment. Telemedicine makes medical triage and treatment available remotely. And there are hundreds of apps to promote wellness by doing things like tracking our sleep and helping us manage asthma or diabetes, other chronic illnesses. Imagine how much more healthy our communities would be if we had those kinds of resources and a widespread focus on maintaining our legal wellness. The legal field may be lagging a bit behind the medical field in using technology to promote wellness, but the concept of legal wellness has been around since the 1950s with the work of Lewis C. Brown in preventive law. I am convinced that a cultural shift towards valuing legal wellness would produce dramatically positive and life-changing results. Just as with healthcare, technology can help us make legal wellness more accessible and tailored to an individual's needs. Legal wellness through preventive law is particularly important for the 1.2 million Tennesseans living in poverty who can't afford to get legal help when they're facing challenges meeting their basic human needs. Legal problems like medical problems tend to snowball, producing an avalanche of damage and costs. All right, so play with me here a minute. Imagine you're a single parent working to make ends meet. You have a savings account. You don't have a savings account. You wish you did. You don't have a savings account, and you pay more in rent than you can afford but you do it because it means your child is zoned for a good school. The problem is you have some outstanding court costs and fines, and now your driver's license has been suspended. So you've got to figure out how you're going to get your child to school every day and how to get to work. Sometimes you take the bus, and sometimes you take your chances and drive with a suspended license. Eventually, you're fired because you're chronically late to work. Now you can't pay your rent. All right, you see where this is going? Let's stop there and step away from our scenario, because we can see how quickly one legal problem, outstanding fines and fees, has multiplied into at least 3 more legal problems. Now let's revisit our scenario. Imagine you're at the beginning of the problem where you have some outstanding fines and fees and your driver's license is about to be suspended. What if your friend tells you about a legal wellness app that you can access from your phone? And when you answer the money problem questions, you find out that you qualify for a waiver of those fees and fines because of your income level. The snowball that we experienced in the first scenario has been stopped in its tracks, and the avalanche of devastating legal problems is avoided. That's the power of legal resources merging with communication devices. And that's why my organization, Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services, has created a legal wellness checkup app. It's an online interview similar to the holistic questions that you might answer in an appointment with your physician for your annual physical. It's built on the Neota Logic platform, and through answering a series of questions covering things like money problems, family issues, housing, employment, health care, users identify and learn the legal barriers they're facing, including getting connected to their right legal resources in their community to solve those problems. It's based on conditional logic, so as the interview proceeds, the questions that you answer next are based on what the app determines are applicable for your situation. It only takes about 15 minutes to complete our legal wellness checkup, and at the end you get a customized report that you can email to yourself or print. Resources that come in the report might include a video about what to expect in General Sessions Court, a link to a legal aid booklet for a tenant to explain their rights and obligations with their landlord. You might also get a link to Tennessee Free Legal Answers, which is a free-to-use online legal advice service so people who can't afford to hire an attorney can ask questions to a pro bono lawyer online. TALS is also focusing on legal wellness through our free civil legal helpline. The helpline has always been a tool for providing remote triage, advice, and referral, but now we're using it as a companion to our legal wellness checkup. We've partnered with the Tennessee Department of Human Services and Memphis Area Legal Services to make it easier for underserved people in Shelby County to get legal help. Families who are eligible to receive temporary assistance for needy families, what you used to think of as welfare. They're invited to complete their legal wellness checkup at their local Department of Human Services or at their housing complex so they can learn about the barriers they're facing. And then without having to deal with scheduling or transportation, they can immediately meet with a lawyer from Memphis Area Legal Services to start working on those issues. And to help sustain their legal wellness, TALS staff attorneys serve as legal coaches to the families, offering ongoing monthly check-in calls and texts. It's also exciting for me to see how other organizations are identifying the ways that TALS legal wellness checkup can help clients in their communities. Here are a few examples. Right here at Vanderbilt, law students are merging health care and legal care by using the legal wellness checkup at Vanderbilt's Shade Tree Clinic. The Nashville Financial Empowerment Center excuse me, offers wellness checkups to clients who are there to get help with their tax returns. Recently, I met a man at the Financial Empowerment Center who skeptically agreed to take our wellness checkup app while waiting in line for help with his return. He said, "I've got problems, but they aren't legal problems." 20 minutes later, he came up to me and he said, "It turns out I do have some legal problems." For the first time, he saw that there may be a connection between an old conviction record and the problems he was having getting better housing. And he realized that he was not aware of his rights and obligations in his current housing situation. That's one of the most valuable functions that a legal wellness checkup serves, helping people see that the barriers they face are a legal problem that has a legal solution. So the opportunity for all of us is to think about how we can use tools like the legal wellness checkup, preventive law tools, and continue to innovate in the legal wellness space to make our communities healthier and stronger. Thank you.
So if nothing else, I hope what we're hearing is there's an enormous amount of stuff taking place. You probably were unaware. If this day is going to have the purpose that we intend for it, this is not the end of any of these conversations. This is beginning a launch. So I've been talking to people about how we can go from this point forward. Help us figure out how to go from this point forward. By the end of the day, we want to be able to say, these are things that you can be a part of going forward. That's our purpose for these facilitated conversations to follow and the design sprint to end the day. So let's ask some questions of these geniuses that are putting to practice what we've all been preaching about. Lawton is still here, and so we're going to use a Q&A session to ask of Lawton or any of these speakers what it is that they might be able to answer in terms of your questions. So it's time to have that Q&A session. Who would like to ask the first question? Okay, who else would like to ask? Adele.
This question is mainly for GB. So Martin Luther King said that one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. So how would an AI legal system know that the law is unmoral in the beginning to disobey the law? Thank you.
Wow.
I have an easy answer. That's easy. I don't know. That's a profound question, Adele, actually. And I think it's the kind of question that we really have to start seriously asking and building into our build out of AI, right? So, and I think we could all agree that these questions haven't been asked, and we have some companies that will go unnamed that weren't asking these important questions. And our legislators are just catching up with them and not asking intelligent questions. So I don't have an answer for you, but I think that's a question that has to be put on the table, Adele.
That sounds like a project to come out of today. So let's keep it up. More questions of these geniuses. Yes.
Jeff Oresti, Internet Bar. One of the underpinning assumptions is that we respect the legislative process as the lawmaking process. I think Adele's question goes to the point of culture, and now we have a global culture, is where law is supposed to come from. How do we get to the point where we all are making the law for the 21st century that this technology can embrace?
Lawton, JB, who's up? Anybody want to address that?
Well, I'll give you a Tennessee example. We have 95 counties, some really strong urban centers and some very, very rural counties where the court clerk office doesn't even have a computer and there may be only one or two lawyers in the whole town. And so for us, landlord-tenant issues and housing are huge. So there's an act in Tennessee that was really important for our state called the Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. And that act was actually brought forward by students. And so I really think, this discussion of law students and law schools and school involvement, students are the ones who brought forward that issue. And so I do think we have to look towards the people who are experiencing problems as having a powerful voice in our ability to change the law and make an impact. And then we provide the tools that can help them do that.
So there are some folks here associated with the IBO, the Internet Bar Organization, whose premise is we can deliver justice at the internet layer. You need to talk with them. They've got some fabulous ideas of what we can do outside of government, military, banks. We can deliver justice at the internet layer. Question?
I just wanted to maybe problematize that just a little bit because we don't have a pure democracy. It's a representative democracy. And I think part of the problem with the technology is that it tends to jump over the kinds of structural impediments to the formation of faction that were designed into the Constitution. I mean, they're basically impediments that are created by time and space. And of course, the technology compresses the time and space, and it allows for the formation of factions. And I just think that often we jump to these assumptions that, you know, they're sort of panaceas. You know, more democracy is always better. You know, more responsiveness is always better. And we have to be really careful about thinking about how these technologies are changing really basic fundamental institutions in the American democracy, right? And so one of the things I think readily of is Arab Spring. You know, there was so much excitement early on that we're going to just democratize everything, and we'll have these flowering democracies. And what was the lesson that's learned is it's really pretty easy to tear down a government, but it's much harder to build a society, right? And so we need to learn those lessons. It's just a comment.
So I'll just, if we have time, just add to that a little bit. So I was also a few weeks ago in Stockholm on someone else's dime at a conference on this very issue, so I think we all have in our conception of governance ideas of what lies behind good governance: transparency, legitimacy, process, due process, participation. The problem is that those good governance principles were built around kind of a slower set of issues, right? So we have an administrative state that governs education, welfare, labor, etc. And the problems are kind of long, slow push problems. This is a fast pulse problem, and we don't really have a great sense of what good governance is for fast emerging problems. We have a sense of what good governance is for what we at this conference called super fast catastrophic problems. So natural disasters, etc. We suspend some of the good governance, right? We're not going to have hearings to decide what are we going to do about, you know, a forest fire or a flood in Houston. In between is this you know, problem of we have compressed and back to Andy's, you know, S curve. The S curve is just so fast that we have not designed and thought carefully about what is good governance for this kind of a problem. And I think that's what I'm trying to, you know, help happen at Vanderbilt, and I hope we all would feel a responsibility for creating a cultural demand for a new kind of governance that can handle this problem.
Sounds like another project that can come out of today. Some more questions?
Yes. Is this working? Sorry. I don't have as much of an existential problem, so more practical problem. So this is for, sorry, I think Andy. If I understood correctly, you were part of one of the first law firms run by business people. I'm interested, I work for a law firm, and I'm interested to know how, in your observation, how did that company become more like traditional law firms, and how did it become less like I'm interested how it diverged or how it...
Absolutely. And I guess deliberately so. The roadmap from the outset was very unlike a typical law firm. And one of the most common pieces of feedback that the Riverview gets from customers when they come and visit the offices is, I don't feel like I'm visiting a law firm. I feel like I'm in my own business. I feel like I'm more at home here. It doesn't feel like a different, somewhat alien culture to the one that I work within myself. And that was deliberately, you know, laid out. So and it was fascinating, actually, for me to see Lawton's diagram of having mapped out the game style. You know, this is the client experience, and where can we earn the star points, etc. Riverview went through a very similar exercise, with the benefit of doing it before they even put all those processes together and saying, what should these maps look like? Let's map out everything to do with the way that we interact with clients, the way that we work as a business, everything that we do, and let's try and identify those moments of truth, if you like, from a client perspective, recognizing that for everybody within the firm or the business, depending on what you call it, there are clients both internally and externally that need to be served. So it was and remains something that looks quite unlike a traditional firm. Very flat structure, very open offices, fixed fee. I think it was Ritu mentioned earlier on, in London, many more firms are fixed fee, and I think that's been partly driven by a number of the providers that have come out of the ABS construct saying, you know, we can use data, we can use science to crunch some numbers here and do many more things on a fixed fee basis than we used to do.
To that, if I can just add, the value of what Andy just said is I can give you lawyers in the United States of America who do really high-level, extraordinarily sophisticated work, like patent litigation, on a fixed fee, more profitably than selling hours. It's not a made-up thing. It's a reality. Once you know what you're doing and how you're doing it, and the data is there that you can use to do it better, faster, cheaper, a fixed fee enables you to do it better, faster, cheaper, more profitably. This is not fiction. We just have to get our minds into a new world in which legal service delivery looks very, very different than it did before. Other questions anybody has? Yes.
I guess I'm curious about where we might be headed in terms of unauthorized practice of law versus what's authorized. And I hear stories about lawyers working for consulting firms like Deloitte or something like that. And you know, the idea is, you know, I'm technically not practicing law, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And I'm just curious with, you know, law firms hiring non-attorney technologists, which I think is a great thing. If we're going to see a change in sort of the structure of, I know this is a hard question to answer, but you know, might we see a change in terms of what's considered authorized practice of law, sort of the growth of non-attorney legal practitioners?
First of all, I'm glad that Thomson Reuters is sitting on the stage, because if you go to the executive report that came out in January under the Thomson Reuters oversight with respect to the state of the law in 2018, you'll see that $10 billion of legal services traditionally provided by the big law firms went into the pockets of alternative legal service providers. There are some of you here. There's one. You're stealing our money. And you're doing it without a law firm. So the question is a very legitimate one, and it's threatening the traditional business model in very significant ways. Does anybody want to address that? Lawton does.
So I'm at one of those law firms that's seen all sorts of work go the direction of alternative providers. I mean, it started with outsourcing photocopies. Who in the room remembers when we would charge 10 cents a page for photocopying documents? Okay, so things are definitely moving more and more to that very sophisticated level. Our experience, what we're trying to do is partner with LPOs, again, towards solving a client's problems. An in-house team is going to look at a whole array of options to solve problems, and they're going to need to start piecing together a number of different sort of providers. And what we're trying to do at our firm is serve as really sort of a general contractor to figure out and advise on what's the best way to piece this all together and get it integrated so that the in-house team doesn't have to manage 6 different vendors. They can look at the law firm with the kind of that most sophisticated subject matter expertise over that portfolio and leave it to the firm, ideally, to work with the LPO, the technology company, alternative staffing teams, and really design kind of a fully integrated solution that the client then just gets a great output. So I don't see it as threatening, but we've got to figure out how to kind of all start coming together to solve in a more integrated fashion.
Sounds like Lawton is suggesting SoLI, just so you know. Thank you. One last question?
Hi, this is a really unusual question for you guys, and I want to follow up with a comment. For you 4 panelists, have you considered how much electricity is used when you move from people-based systems to these electronic computer-based systems to deliver legal services?
I have not. But it is an interesting question. I mean, particularly with the interest in blockchain, which is an incredibly energy-intensive technology and designed to be that way. I think it's an important question to be asking. You know, I mean, I think that I certainly don't know. It's beyond my understanding of how the technologies actually work, but lawyers use many technologies today and are on their computers all day, and what the marginal electricity difference between doing that versus the new types of technologies that they're using, I'm not sure. Obviously, the more data crunching you're doing and dealing with AI, those are presumably more energy-intensive technologies. So it's definitely something to consider.
Sounds like a problem. Sounds like we have an opportunity. And look over there. Wave your hand, Shauna. Shauna works with IBM Q. Did you know that there's quantum computing? Did you know that you can play in her pool for free? Do you know how much energy a quantum Q computer takes? Do you know how much energy blockchain takes when it begins to really, really, really work hard? Yeah, big problem. Your comment.
Yeah, the reason why, you guys are prescient, so the reason why I asked about this is because at the airport I'm looking for something to read coming down here, and I saw this MIT technology review on blockchain. I thought, wow, that sounds interesting. I'm a techie and a lawyer, and so I pick it up, and I think I'm going to read a bunch of technological articles about the details on blockchain technology. Lo and behold, it's about how largely irrelevant they think the blockchain actually is in many respects, and secondly, how harmful it is in many respects, including environmentally, because of the immense amount of electricity that it draws, which has to be produced somehow, and then there's heat dissipation issues which alter the environment as well. So I guess what my comment is I think that we need improved technology, actually like what everyone here is doing for clients. However, I think we need to be mindful of how we do it in terms of the consequences, sort of as the need for electricity and perhaps other aspects of it. So maybe when there's law for AI, there should be law for electricity use by technology.
And he's an environmental lawyer. So I think he can help us. But that's one of those big, hairy problems. No one here can solve any of those problems by ourselves. This is the call to action. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kat, who will tell us what's next. And let me just simply say that we're going to move from this to lunch next door. Tables are there, the buffet is up. But Kat's going to talk about the processes we will follow next.
Thank you, Larry, and another thank you.